But even if you're able to communicate between different dimensions, how do you get aid between them? Oh, hey there. Welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. Golden Hauer and I were just talking about sharing resources between dimensions. Since we've been bouncing around a bit between parallel dimensions through rifts caused by the nefarious supervillain Bang the Bonker, we thought it might be a good idea to coordinate a way for people to help one another.
Snug.
Oh, right. Also, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, in addition to providing entertaining and informative photography-related content, I also go on adventures with the crew of the Starship Fibonacci. While you're here, be sure to subscribe so you get future episodes of the podcast, and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at The Nerdy Photo. And be sure to tell your friends about the podcast.
Snug, 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 snug.
Good idea. I'll introduce the episode while you do that. In this episode of the podcast, photographer Lindsey Turner is back to discuss ways in which you can use your photography to give back to your community by working with charities and nonprofit organizations. As Lindsey is clear to point out, it doesn't always mean donating your services for free, and it might not even involve taking pictures. You could be putting your skills at social media or graphic design to use to help out. This type of work is not only emotionally rewarding, but it can create deeper ties between your photography business and the community. That conversation coming up right after the break.
Snug.
You ready? Oh, that was fast. Hey there. Do you photograph people, families, couples, weddings? Are you tired of using the same boring, static poses over and over again? Try the Nerdy Photographer's Let's Be Real unposed photography prompts to get your subjects engaged with you and with each other. I developed these over 20 years and thousands of photo shoots. These prompts will help you capture dynamic, natural photos of your clients. And right now, you can save 25% on any of our prompt backs with the code POD25P. That's all uppercase, POD 25P. Stop posing and start prompting. Hello, and welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. I am your host, Casey Fatchett, and I am here today with a returning guest, Lindsey Turner. Lindsey, welcome back to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Casey. Glad to be here.
Today we're going to talk about a topic that, it means a lot to me. I know it means a lot to you, but it's working as a photographer, working with charities and nonprofits. Basically, it doesn't have to mean donating your services, but there's a lot that goes into this topic. I don't know if there's something you want to start out with, but there are lots of different ways that a photographer can work with a charity or nonprofit, right?
Absolutely. I think the common misconception is that a nonprofit is a business that doesn't make money, but that's not actually true. They just have to put that money back into their programming. So nonprofits often have budgets, they should, and sometimes grant funding. So, for example, I was engaged before the pandemic by our local library, the Oliver Wolcott Library here in Litchfield, Connecticut, and they had received a grant to redo their website and their branding, including branding photography. So they actually had a budget line item to hire me. It was a pretty involved project. I was there on and off for 2 months. And so that's something I felt good about. I still gave them a better price than I would have if it was a corporation.
Right.
But it was sort of a win-win for both of us. And I really, really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah. I've done both. I've done both where you're like donating your services to a charity or you're working with a nonprofit, and yeah, it's like you determine kind of like, am I, going to give these people a break on the pricing because I, agree with the cause? But why do you think it can be beneficial to photographers to work with a charity or with a nonprofit?
Volunteering your time feels good, period. There's a ton of studies about how volunteering is more for the volunteer necessarily than the organization because it's just something that feels good to do. But whether you're donating your services or your skills as a photographer or you're sharing other skills and expertise, when you're doing something from the goodness of your heart, you're giving back because you want to do that. So that's, for me, the beauty of volunteering your time is you get to decide where you want to put your time, your talent, your energy. Beyond the intangible benefits of volunteering your time, of course, then comes the visibility in your community for your business, which ultimately will probably help you. So it's also likely that you may have other skills beyond your photography. Not everybody wants to spend their time that way. But for example, my background before I became a full-time photographer was in PR and marketing for arts nonprofits. So I took that time and talent, and I'm now volunteering as a member of my town's Economic Development Commission. Oh. So I'm in the process of helping fund and build a new tourism website and social media presence. Some of that comes with me donating my photographs to help them tell their story, but largely I'm donating my other skills. I'm fostering relationships. I'm using my skills about compelling storytelling and marketing and PR to help my town. And that's not, a specific, here I am working as a photographer, I'm going to take some pictures for you and then go away. So that's sort of a very different use of volunteering as a photographer, but using my other skills as well.
Right. And I think that's something that photographers maybe don't necessarily think of right off of the bat is like, we generally there are a lot of photographers who are, small businesses that they don't have like a huge team of people. We do a lot of things. We do writing, we do blogging, we do social media work, marketing for our business, and using those skills. You were in marketing and PR before becoming a photographer, but photographers also tend to have some knowledge of other things. Also, it could be as simple as like graphic design work that some like a charity might need, or organizing their digital catalog of media can also be something that you spend your time doing.
Teaching them how to use social media instead of just posting a picture with a couple hashtags. Right. That's something I've done as well too, just as a one-off here and there to help people get started because they're intimidated by it. And we as photographers have to use social media for our businesses. So a lot of us have just taught ourselves those skills.
Right. And it's those things that we don't necessarily think that, this is a skill I can in turn then turn around and donate my time or, it to a charity or to a nonprofit, like whether it's donating or you're getting paid. You can use those skills, not just the photo taking skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when a photographer is choosing to go back to what you were saying about beneficial, you had mentioned it can be, eventually you're getting it out into the community. Your name is attached to this. It's goodwill. I mean, it makes you feel good. And you're just sort of like putting I feel you're putting good energy out there into the world. And eventually you hope that some of that comes back to you. But when partnering with a charity or with a nonprofit, what are some things that a photographer should consider?
For me, I would say first and foremost, is it a charity you care about? Is it a mission that matters to you? Then beyond that, if it's somebody who you're going to be working with in a pretty formal capacity, is it a charity in good standing? Or do they have a strong track record? You wouldn't really want to align yourself with a nonprofit that wasn't run well. Maybe they had some fiscal confusion. I wouldn't want to touch that because you don't want to associate yourself with that. So you could ask them for, a copy of their most recent financial statements. You could even talk to some of their board members if you felt like you wanted to learn more. And then what are the terms of your donation? So after you've decided this is somebody you want to work with, have an agreement, even if there's no money changing hands. So there are expectations and they're clear on both sides. You don't want to go into it and then have surprises or have someone be disappointed because they expected X and you had offered Y, but you never really talked about it and you weren't clear about it. Right down to what rights do they have to use your images? Are they using them just for their new website? Will they be using them in print? Will it end up on a billboard? How long do you want to give them permission to use them? Just the same way you would with a regular client, even though there's no money changing hands, you want to make sure you're clear about the expectation so no one's disappointed after the fact.
Yeah, you definitely want to spell everything out because I've had this go both ways where I made the mistake of not putting it, in writing beforehand. And then it got it to like, oh, well, we expected that you were going to provide, thoroughly retouched versions of every photo that we decided we wanted. And I'm like, oh yeah, we should have had a discussion on the number of photos that I was going to provide, but we didn't. Or there's, other, like you're saying, usage. Like, how are they just using it on social media? Are they using it on their website? Are they going to be using it in print? I had an event. I had a kind of a famous nonprofit that I'm not going to mention the name of, try to get in touch with me to photograph an event, which was going to have celebrities present. And they came to me and said, like, short notice, and said, we need images immediately after, retouched immediately after the event, to send to print, and to, we need to have like a dozen fully retouched high res images to send out in press releases. We're going to be using them in print. We're going to be using them on billboards. We're going to be using them, on the web, whatever. And I was like, will I get credit for any of this? And they're like, no. And I was sort of like, there's a lot you're asking me for. And there was just some sketchy things going on. So I was like, yeah, can we put this all in writing? And they're like, no, we're not going to sign anything. And I was just like, then I'm not going to do that. I'm sure you can find somebody who will do that. And I was like, you're asking me to, I'll go way above and beyond for absolutely, like nothing. They were not a charity. They were a nonprofit, and they had a lot of money. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to have at least 3 people here to do this job. So it's not just me giving my time. So
that's a big deal.
Yeah, that was something else to consider. I was like, we need to, like, you want things that are fully retouched in like within an hour of the end of the event. It wasn't even just like same day. It was like, okay, this is going to take, extra effort. But yeah, like definitely put everything in writing, because then, like you said, we manage the expectations. We make sure that there's no hard feelings or surprises, around the bend. So should photographers, when they're like, besides the emotional reward that you get from doing good and helping people out, like, should photographers be looking to get any sort of immediate response or, reward for doing work with charities or nonprofits?
I would say no, without any hesitation, because donating your time should come with no strings attached. If we're talking about a straight donation, if they're hiring you, then there's a money component, and that's different. But if you are strictly donating your time, you're doing that because it's something that's important to you. And that's how you want to, think about how valuable all of our time is as business owners, as, we may have families and other things going on in our lives. So to commit to saying, yes, I'm going to do this, I think it's important that you do it out of the goodness of your heart. That being said, I find that whenever I get out, literally or figuratively, of my bubble and meet other people, something comes of it. It may be as simple as I meet somebody who I think, I really want to connect you with this friend or this client, or this person that I work with in some other organization, because I think you guys could help each other. And that always makes me feel good to connect other people. And it might be a potential future client, but it's important to give with your whole heart without those expectations, I think.
Yeah, I think that you always get the most out of it when you go into it not expecting to get anything back. In that case, like, not the financial or, marketing reward should not be the goal. And I think that, I've done some work with various charities like over the years. And one of the ones that, one of the things that I did was, for breast cancer survivors. And we did it was just for them. They did a body painting project where these women, to make them feel comfortable and, about with their bodies and make them feel good. So it was like these photos were just for them, and if they chose that to show them to anyone, that was completely their thing. And like, for me, it was really, my mom had breast cancer twice. So it was a lot about, just like trying to help these women feel good and feel powerful and empowered, when it came to their bodies. So that was the reward for me. Eventually, though, it ended up getting big, because their response to it was so positive. Like, the women who were involved was so positive that some of them got together and were like, we want to like make this a thing. And they ended up getting it, I think, published on HuffPost, which was, good for me in the long run. But that wasn't the goal. The goal was certainly not to get it published.
Well, the thing that really stands out to me with that is that it aligns with your values. It was important to you because of your connection to your mother and what she'd gone through. And I think when you're donating your time, it really needs to align with your values, whether it's your personal values or the values of your brand. That's really important. If you're being hired by a nonprofit, I think it matters a little bit less. But that being said, I still, for myself, would never work for a nonprofit or a charity that did something that was completely opposite to what I believed in.
Right.
I couldn't do that.
Yeah. I mean, it has to have, you have to be at least be running parallel. I think otherwise it's sort of like, why am I supporting someone who doesn't, who's going out of their way to go against what I believe in.
Absolutely.
So we've talked a lot about when people approach us, when as photographers to, either work with a nonprofit or donate to a charity, donate services to a charity. What should photographers keep in mind when they choose a charity or nonprofit they want to work with? Like, what are the things that they, if in approaching them? I mean, if for a photographer who says I really want to work with somebody and use my services for good, whether it's, working with a nonprofit and you're still going to get paid, or, working with a charity, what are some things they should keep in mind when reaching out?
It's a really interesting question. I've personally never actually pitched a charity to donate my services to. For me, it happens pretty organically through my involvement in my community. The primary nonprofit that I donate my services to annually as a photographer, specifically, taking pictures for them and providing them, is for a nonprofit called Litchfield Performing Arts. And that's a nonprofit that I actually worked for fundraising and as a PR and marketing director for 15 years. So I was sort of deeply committed to their mission. And so this was a really lovely way for me to continue to support them, but with my new hat on as professional photographer instead of, in my role for them full time. So that's something that really mattered to me. So I was able to continue doing that. But if you don't know where to start, if you have no connections with a charity already, I would sort of look immediately around you if there's a nonprofit that aligns with your values, like we were talking about before. Or if you just think about something that might align directly with your brand. If you're a family photographer, maybe you seek out an organization that works with fostering or adoption, and then you could photograph the families perhaps in court or the day that their adoption becomes final. Or like you were saying before, if it was actually something I had in mind, if you had been touched by something, in your case, cancer with your mom, portraits of people going through chemo or survivors with their families, or whatever that looks like for you. Usually it's something that mattered to you. And then you could seek out nonprofits that do that already, like have an established track record of having photographers volunteer their time for those reasons.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I got involved with the project I was mentioning, was with Sloan Kettering. And it was because a friend of mine had been going through chemo, and she wanted to do these glamorous photo shoots at each of her chemo sessions, kind of like make it something fun, as opposed to how, horrifying and, terrible it can be and just monotonous at the same time. So she was like, we had brought in a makeup artist, and, she had outfits that were donated as well. Like at each of her, she's just sitting in the chair, like going through chemo, but like we, did her up with wigs and outfits and makeup. But that's what, then that sort of grew out into other people were like, this is an awesome idea. And then the people at the hospital were like, oh, this is, would you want to do something with this, with these other breast cancer survivors? But yeah, I think that one of the things that is really important is to look for, like we said, people who align with your values, but also when you're approaching them, be very clear about what you're willing to donate, or where, what you're willing to do. If you're an event photographer, yeah, think about covering events for a charity is something that can be very helpful. But don't go in there and be like, if you don't do portraits, don't go in and offer to do portraits for them, because I feel like that's you shouldn't be practicing on folks that when you're donating your time or services.
Yeah, that doesn't serve you or them. Yeah.
Right. It just kind of makes it look like you're just serving yourself.
Agreed.
So, do you have any other advice that you'd like to give for photographers who are considering getting involved with either charities or nonprofits?
I think that sort of after you decide, let's say you've found a charity you want to work with, or someone's approached you, and it's something you want to move forward with, I would treat them like any other client. I would learn about their goals and their needs for a photographer. Like you were just saying, do they need you to come and document their gala auction, their fundraiser? Or do they want you to come throughout the year to document their program over 12 months, over 1 month? What kind of overall time commitment do they expect? How many images are they looking for? And like we said before, once you've said yes, to make sure all the terms are on both sides, everybody knows what's happening. And then one tiny detail, which you might not think about, and I do because I had worked for a nonprofit, is that if they are going to be paying you, if they're hiring you, even if you've discounted your services, you'll need to make sure you get a copy of their document, which is called a 501c3,
Yes.
which indicates that they are indeed a charity, because when they pay you, you cannot charge them sales tax because they're a nonprofit. So you need to have that document for your accountant, for any reason, if you get audited or what have you.
Right. Make sure you have the paperwork, because there are a lot of people who will say, and I've had it happen, like, oh, we're at 501c3, and you're like, okay, and this was, the early years before I got jaded and, realized I needed to ask everybody for the paperwork. And I was like, oh, sure. And then they would be like, oh, hey, I need that for my tax information or whatever. And they'd be like, what? Oh, we don't have that. And I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah, like
I can't believe somebody actually told you they were a nonprofit when they weren't. That's really upsetting.
Well, but
it's a good lesson.
Right. Learn from my mistakes. And always ask. I always ask now, but that was many moons ago when I was young and not so inquisitive as to or questioning as far as whether people had ulterior motives. Not that I think that everyone is going to, but you should obviously check.
Yeah. And I think that the last thing I'll say is that sometimes people think, oh, well, there's no money changing hands, and we're maybe it's a friend or someone well and you trust them. But even still, just put everything in writing, have a really clear conversation, and make it clear that it's just as much for them as it is for you. And they will respect you so much more as a professional, knowing that you've done all that, and they'll feel much more confident working with you too. So.
I think that's important. Like you bring up because it often comes through friends or friends of a friend who happen to know you're a photographer. You'll get these inquiries from like, hey, we're doing this charity thing or whatever. Like, we'd really love to have if you could donate, your services. I mean, I get it all the time for events. People will be like, hey, can you come and photograph our event? And then I'm like, there's first of all the question of like, that's not really, as we said, that doesn't really align with my personal values. Or we get to like, I'm already booked for that day. Or the third one is like, okay, now we need to get that conversation of, what is expected from this. And sometimes people are like, what? We just thought you'd just show up and give us pictures. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that like you need to have that conversation, and because normally you'll kind of get those people who just think, oh, this just happens. And, you send us the pictures and we can use them however we want. And there's just sort of this, like, this is just between friends conversation. And while most people, will treat you fairly, and it's good to have that, paperwork there, like, as you said, to protect them as well as you. And it's like something I always tell my clients, my regular clients, is like, this contract is there to protect you as well as me. And putting it in that framework, I think goes a long way. Like, as you had already stated, goes a long way to sort of eliminating the mysteries. We don't want a lot of mysteries and unknowns going on.
I agree. And I was just thinking, actually, there's one more way that you can help a nonprofit without directly doing the kind of work we've been discussing, which is to donate what you already do, like to donate a session or something of that nature to their auction to help them raise money, but it's not you directly going in and photographing their organization. So that's something that I think a lot of new photographers do when they're getting involved in a community. I've had mixed results, and it really helps to get the word out if it's done well. One of those things I did most recently was I took on school portrait photography, and so for the school that I photographed, it was a great experience, and everyone was really happy. And now the entire parent body knew who I was in a much bigger way. So I donated, I created a package actually, and I reached out to our local spa who I had built a relationship with over the past year through my other volunteer work, and asked if they'd donate spa services for mom before the session. It was a family session. So they were going to get hair and makeup and manicure and all that stuff done before the family session. So I offered it to the auction as a package. So family photography plus spa day for mom, and it went for over market value. A, because I made it enticing. B, because they knew who I was now.
Right.
And it felt great. I was able to, yeah, exactly. So I was able to help them raise a whole bunch of money. And I even offered the second runner-up. It ended up in a bidding war. And I contacted the second family who had been bidding on it and asked if they would still be interested to have a session with me. And then I would donate, a percentage of the session back to the school. So that was great for me and great for them. And everybody felt really warm and fuzzy about it. So there are other ways to help people raise money too.
Yes. And that's one of the things that I've run into the same thing. Like when I moved a few years ago into New Jersey, and like people spreading the word that I was a photographer in the area, and like they came out of the woodwork with the, hey, do you want to donate a photo session to, our fundraiser of some kind? And I'm like, you kind of have to be careful with it. But as you said, you building some sort of relationship and value in the community first, like before that happens. Otherwise, you just look like a name on, a piece of paper, and people are like, well, what, I don't know what this is, if this person's any good, or, like you kind of have to be a known quantity to the audience for that to really help generate anything for yourself other than, or actually for the charity or whatever the fundraiser that you're involved in. Because otherwise people just go like, oh, this could be anybody. If people don't know that, that you're any good at what you do, they're not going to like you said, donate close to or over market value, which is what you're trying to raise money for somebody. You need to have that sort of recognition within the community for that to work out.
Yep. All the more reason to get involved in your community in other ways.
Exactly. That's the, what this is really all about is getting involved in, while it might be your local community. And as you've mentioned, a lot of your work is within your, where you live. And when we say community though, it's not necessarily just meaning like a geographical location. It's a community of people.
Absolutely.
And like people who are touched by the causes that a charity or a nonprofit works with. And that's becoming a part of that community and showing that you are genuinely a part of it. That if you're looking to make yourself feel better, as we said, that's the biggest reward here, is, doing something that makes you feel good. And then maybe down the line, that doing good things comes back to you in the form of people, recognizing you, or, meeting new people who eventually become clients or whatever. It's not the end goal. It shouldn't be the end goal when you're getting into this sort of thing. But when you become a part of that community, you can be surprised, even if you're not donating your photography work. If, like you were saying, we were talking about before, even if you're doing like social media or whatever you're donating or giving of yourself, you become part of those people, like that community of people and that group of people, and people know that you're a photographer, and they might eventually recommend you as a photographer because they know you and who you are, and they've come to know you better because you're a part of that community. And that's, that's just my 2 cents on that's the doing the nice things and what can come back to help you in the long run.
Yeah. As long as your motivations are, honest and true. And like you were saying before, you never know what will lead to what. You did that project with someone who was going through chemo, and that led to the next project, which was really exciting for you, that you loved, that led to more recognition. And, you could then channel that into, a story in your local newspaper, write a press release for yourself about the project and what had transpired. Obviously, if you have model releases and permission to do all that. But there's nothing wrong with, sharing what you're doing in that way either, which always is helpful.
for a new podcast? Check out the Infectious Groove podcast. My name is Russ, and I host the show along with Michelle and Kyle. Every Monday, the three of us bring you music news and tell you our jammy jams, so you'll always have new music to check out. The Infectious Groove podcast discusses music from nearly every decade and genre while openly displaying our passion for music you need to hear. On top of that, we have a thought-provoking main topic of discussion every week to get you thinking, discussing, and sharing music. We also include interviews with the music stars of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms. Subscribe and listen to the Infectious Groove podcast on your favorite podcast platform today.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how we handle the situation.
Did you have a contract?
Well, I had one I found for free online, but my lawyer says it might not hold up.
Next time, you should head over to nerdyphotographer.com. They've got a selection of contract templates for weddings, events, portrait sessions, and even for hiring second photographers and associate photographers, which would certainly have helped you in your current situation.
Really? I will check that out. Nerdyphotographer.com?
Yep, nerdyphotographer.com. They've got all sorts of contracts and agreements that can help make sure to protect you and your clients. So what are you going to do?
Well, we just have to wait and see what happens, I guess.
So, no pants on?
Who know anything below the waist? Totally Porky Pig in it.
Impressive.
Not really. Yeah, it was pretty cold out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey. And now for my favorite part of the show. What's that say? Useless information. This is always death.
Now, Lindsay, do you think that rivers only run north to south?
This is a terrible question. I'm not a science person.
Well, I think that...
Tell me why.
Well,
or are these just random questions?
It's just a random question. But the thing is, the only thing I think that, especially here in North America, we tend to think of, because you've got most rivers run from the north of the U.S. or wherever to the south. They run south to the sea. But the thing is, rivers are not affected by that. They're not. They do not run north to south. Because those are actually just honestly directions that we've kind of made up.
It's downhill.
Right, downhill. Exactly. That is it. That's it. Gravity. Gravity is the only thing that affects how a river runs. That's quite simply the only explanation, because like here we have, in North America, we have the Mississippi, Colorado, and Rio Grande that all, and the Hudson that all run from north to south. But there are other major rivers, the Nile and the Rhine, both run from south to north. The Amazon.
Actually, I did know that because my son was studying Egypt recently.
The Amazon goes northeast in direction, and the Congo goes due north, then makes a really wide corner, and then goes south into the Atlantic Ocean. So it goes both north and south. So.
Well,
no.
I appreciate the fun fact.
So fun fact.
It's not something I've given a huge amount of thought, except for this recent Egypt research, because that did just come up for him.
Well, that's the reason it's called useless information. Not that it's ever really going to help you, but like, just so you know, rivers only run in the direction that gets the water towards the center of the earth, towards gravity. That's the only condition that affects how a river flows. Lindsay, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to come back on the podcast and for being here with us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Casey.
Welcome back. I would like to thank Lindsey Turner for joining us on this episode to discuss working with charities and nonprofit organizations. You can find Lindsey on Facebook and Instagram at Lindsey Victoria Photography. That's at Lindsey Victoria Photography. You can get the links in the episode notes, as well as links to the various organizations she mentioned during our talk. Do you have photography-related questions you would like to have answered on a future episode of the Nerdy Photographer Podcast? Join our Facebook group or our subreddit r/thenerdyphoto and let those questions fly. You can even use the hashtag #NerdyPhotoCrew. That's hashtag #NerdyPhotoCrew, and I'll be checking those, and we'll give a shout out when we answer those questions on the podcast. I hope that this discussion inspires you to get involved with a charity or nonprofit in your area. Helping others can be a great way to help yourself.
Snug, 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 snug.
I know, you're very charitable.
Snug, 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 snug.
And you found the location of a transdimensional transport apparatus?
Yeah, snug.
Where are you to bury the lead there, buddy? Let's get to it. Until next time, everybody, stay safe and stay nerdy.
Who's that coming back to town? You better start listening. Who's your heart been beating about? You better listen.